Every doctor needs training. That's why even consultants, we have our CPD. And doctors who are in non-training positions actually probably need more support with that, because they're in roles where they're actually delivering care to patients.
Alice Fenghua Man was college tutor in anaesthetics when all the trainees from her department were withdrawn. Morale collapsed.
The options were, when we discussed as a group, where we could either try to do our best to create a teaching and training environment where there may be a chance that we could get trainees back, or forget about that and just go along the route of, right, we're not a training department and we are just a consultant service.
The decision was to recruit anaesthetists, and with no response from UK applicants, the gaps were filled by doctors from Egypt, Greece, the Czech Republic, from Bulgaria and India, and so began a new chapter.
Although these doctors had quite extensive experience in their own countries, and many of them had already finished their anaesthetic training, when they came to the UK, even very simple things they found it difficult to do. And a lot of it wasn't to do with their lack of clinical knowledge. It was just understanding the processes of how to work, and a lack of confidence in working in a completely new environment. They were very respectful of the hierarchy and therefore found it very difficult to speak up and ask for help. And therefore, when they seemed like they weren't performing, it wasn't because they didn't know. Sometimes they were too scared to ask because they felt that might expose them to being perceived as being weak and not knowledgeable, because in their own country that is what would be perceived. And things that we, as doctors who are used to working in the UK system, just take for granted with UK trainees. Because when we say certain things, it means specific things that aren't clear to doctors who aren't in the UK system. And when they don't know it, we assume that they know nothing. It's horrible, but it's only when we delve deeper and have very, very real conversations with them where we can, discuss exactly what their concerns are, and through that gain their confidence that they can speak out and talk about what they find challenging. We had one doctor whose main aim was to come from Egypt and come to this country and get onto an ST3 rotation so that he could train to be a consultant. So in order to do that, he would need to have completed basic level assessments for the anaesthetic curriculum, which are set ones like the other trainees. And he couldn't complete the assessments, and it wasn't because he didn't have the clinical skills or the knowledge. He just didn't know how to do the form. And it seems like a really straightforward thing to everyone else, because there's nothing hard about what's written on the form. It seems very straightforward, but he just couldn't do it. And I spent weeks and weeks of meeting with him on a one-to-one for hours at a time. I could see he was a grown man and he was close to tears, and it was awful to see tears welling up in his eyes. And I felt so horrible, like I was being really harsh telling him this stuff when it sounded so simple. But I felt that, either I do this or I don't, because if I don't do this, we're not going to get to where he wants to be. And that's not good for him. I promised him that I was going to take him to where he wanted to be. And I think because of the awkwardness of these situations, many people just don't even go there. They avoid having those conversations because it's awkward to tell a grown, intelligent man, why can't you fill in this form, and to teach them in a very basic fashion like they're a child. We had one doctor who really had difficulties with communication skills, who had complaints from paediatric teams when they were at paediatric resuscitations, and no matter how we explained, they couldn't get their head round that it wasn't their technical skills but their communication skills, because I think sometimes, perhaps in other cultures, the non-technical skills aren't as valued as the technical skills, and therefore they were like, well, I know what I'm doing, what's the problem? Why are you picking on me? I did meet somebody who was in that position recently, who in another department, and where they were classed as a trainee or doctor in difficulty. But then when you spoke to them, they had all this guilt that they were carrying because they were told to shadow another doctor. But they felt like a burden on the other doctor, like they were holding them back, and they weren't. They just needed some support and somebody to listen to what their problems were, but they didn't always feel that they could say those things.
The department's progress was becoming clear. The local faculty group had been reorganised, and new educational supervisors brought in. The GMC also put their weight behind it, delivering a pilot programme called Duties of a Doctor, designed specifically for the IMG doctors there, and introduced GMC standard practices, including professionalism, duty of candour, confidentiality, and informed consent. The sessions allowed them to discuss potential scenarios in a safe environment. For example,
there was somebody who had arrested, outside in a public space in the hospital, not on a ward, and they weren't on duty. Would they go and help? So one person said, no, I wouldn't, because I'm not on duty, and if I did something wrong, they would penalise me. And it was shocking to hear things like that, because it seemed that they perceived the UK system and litigation as something that was quite oppressive, and that they felt needs to be very defensive about. The reason why I think that programme was so successful was because many of the situations that we discussed were things that they faced in their daily work and that they had no answer to, and this was the forum where they could get the answers on how to deal with it, and therefore they were able to truly engage with this and use what they had learnt.
Every doctor achieved their goals, passing exams, getting on ST3 rotations in less than a year, and their presence benefited everyone.
The morale in our department before we were able to recruit these doctors was really awful. We were working, because we work in theatres, and it's one anaesthetist per theatre, and we never talked to anybody, so we would go to work and there would be no sunlight and you would never see anyone else or any of your colleagues, and it was just very, very depressing, because we didn't have enough staff who could go in and let us and go and have breaks. Everybody was just very, very demoralised. I think once we started recruiting the doctors to fill the gaps and getting to know them, supporting them, even though it was hard work, we had a goal, there was hope, and things started to change. And when we started getting to know people, and especially I think the best bit was when they were confident enough and they had built up their experience to be able to go on call, and we weren't relying on ad hoc locums to cover on calls. It was amazing. Everybody was just, was in a really good place, yeah. I think it is extremely important to find out where the doctor wants to be, because many of these doctors have left their homes, their families, to come all the way to the UK to achieve something, and they can't just be halfway through their goal because they've given up so much to be here. And so every doctor who comes to our department, we have an educational meeting with them where we explore what their goals are, and then we can set targets. So we ask them, is it just exams that you want to do? Do you want to get onto ST3 rotations? Is it that you want to become a consultant but you don't want to go through the training system because you've already completed your training in your country and therefore you would be going for equivalence? And then once we have identified that, then we can put them on each stream to support them. I think the main thing is to build that rapport and that trust. I think once you have that rapport and that trust, and they trust that what you're saying is in their best interest, people will take on board what you say. And when they see that you're being authentic with it, you're not being challenging or criticising, but you're really, really being sincere about helping them, people will come and, you can work out the problem.